Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Boost Your Visibility and Funding by Listening to the People You Serve special event coming to you from Candid. My name is Eva Nico. I'm Senior Director at Candid, and I have the privilege and the pleasure of working with many nonprofits and helping them to connect with their GuideStar nonprofit profile. Next, let's talk a little bit about what we have in store for you today. So we will obviously say hello, and I will introduce my fellow speakers. And we have several wonderful folks joining us with deep expertise in both feedback practice, listening, and a funder perspective on how feedback is becoming more increasingly visible in the sector. We will discuss that particular topic a little bit more deeply. How is it that there is more visibility for feedback practice? We will also talk to you about how you can share your practices, particularly on the GuideStar profile. For those of you who are joining us who are not yet practicing feedback, we want to give you some guidance for how to get started, as well as link you with some resources for how to get started. Many of you are likely already listening and maybe are just looking for some resources to improve your practice as well. And then finally, we will do some Q&A at the end and then finish with links to resources. So first, what I'd love to do is welcome some of my fellow speakers on today's event, and I will welcome them to open up their video. So you see their lovely photos on the screen, but you can also see them live. And I will ask them to introduce themselves. So maybe Jacob, why don't you take it away next? Please introduce yourself and also say a little bit about why you're excited to join today's event.
Sure, great to be here, Eva. I'm Jacob Harold. I'm Executive Vice President of Candid. And before the merger that formed Candid, I served as President and CEO of GuideStar. I'm here because I believe the social sector is an ecosystem, and that healthy ecosystems are defined by robust feedback loops, and that we as a field have to figure out how to strengthen the feedback loops that allow for learning and accountability and just getting better as a field.
Thank you, Jacob. I'll pass it over to Rod Greiner next.
Hi, thank you so much, Ava. So my name is Rod Greiner. I'm the community coordinator at Feedback Labs. I am really excited to be a part of this conversation, largely because, as evidenced by the name, feedback is really central to the work that I do on a daily basis. So I'm excited to see that this conversation has extended, to nonprofits, to government, and very importantly to the funders that overall, underwrite a lot of this work, and it's growing in importance. So I'm excited to be a part of this conversation.
Thank you, Rod, and welcome. And then on to Lindsay.
Good morning or good afternoon. Good morning from California. Really nice to be on with the three of you and to have everyone in the audience who joined us today. I work at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, and a huge part of my work is our funding and engagement with Fund for Shared Insight, where we really believe that feedback can be a tool and a practice to center and elevate equity in your work. And we're seeing that with funders, with nonprofits in the US, and thanks to work with Feedback Labs and others around the world. So just really excited to dig into those topics, share what we have done and learned, and hear from the other panelists who I know I'll learn a lot from. And then especially the questions are always the best part.
Thank you, Lindsay. Well, without further ado, let's get into the content. So first, I want to do just a very quick level set. Sometimes when you hear feedback, there are probably lots of things that might come to mind. What we are talking about is particularly feedback as information about your constituents' perceptions of what you do and what the impact is on them. So we're really focused on a particular type of feedback. We're not talking about sort of employees, board members, volunteers, or donors offering feedback unless they are the ones that you primarily serve with your mission. Who we're really talking about are the people that you serve with your mission, and that's what we'll be focusing on in today's event. And I will say that, again, different things might come to mind. Many of us have gotten asked for feedback from in many of the experiences today. Whether you're participating in an online webinar, we'll be asking you for some feedback, or whether you're actually, participating on a website, often you get asked for feedback. Here, we're really talking about feedback from the people that you serve and how that can really inform the work of your organization, and even more, how that is increasingly visible in the sector to potential funders and donors. So before we delve into the agenda, I'd love to learn a little bit more about who's in the audience with us. We have over 230 folks participating on today's live event. So my colleague Chris will launch a quick poll. How would you describe your organization's feedback practice? And that could be haven't started yet, started, but we're not yet systematic. We listen, act, and close the loop, and we'll learn more about what that means shortly, but it's essentially having a very robust feedback practice. Or I'm not sure. I want to learn more about feedback. I'm not sure how my organization is yet engaging with it.
53% said they are started, but not yet systematic, followed by 22% haven't started yet, 14% not sure, and 11% we listen, act, and close the loop.
Wonderful. So a lot of folks really eager, sort of on the journey or looking to get started, which is fantastic, and you're in the right place for that. So let's start from how feedback is becoming more visible in the sector. There are a lot of important practices for organizations, from governance, financial accountability, programmatic development, and feedback is one of those practices that can obviously help strengthen programs, help strengthen relationships, help strengthen feedback. But in addition to you should do this because this can actually help your programs and strengthen your organization, there is another aspect of it, which is that feedback is becoming increasingly more visible in the sector. It's not just a kind of a hidden practice in the background. It's something that is increasingly being attended to. And I'll offer just one example, and then Lindsay can tell us more. But one of the things that we've seen is that it's actually getting lifted up, in particular at this moment when COVID-19 has hit many of our communities, where many organizations have to make adjustments, where the people that they serve are in very different circumstances than they were a year ago. And so as part of that, we saw that the Council on Foundations, organized a statement in response to the current crisis, saying that really organizations do need to commit to listening to their partners. So in this case, they're talking about foundations and philanthropy, listening to their partners, and especially lifting up the voices of the communities least heard. And we believe that many nonprofits really have that direct connection with those communities and can help lift up their voices. And so we saw over 800 philanthropic organizations, sign on to that pledge, and that emphasizes listening. And then the work that this is touching didn't just start with COVID and didn't come on the scene with the pandemic. It actually has a much longer and richer history. And I will invite Lindsay to come into the space here with us and tell us a little bit more about the work, particularly of the Fund of Shared Insight, which has been thinking and supporting feedback practice for a long time now.
Thanks, Eva. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, you're coming across great.
You can just pop on the virtual stage. Such times we're living in. Thank you. It is so exciting to see the poll data and to see how many folks are along the way on this journey or are here to potentially get started. So Fund for Shared Insight has been at this a little while now. It's a funder collaborative that was started in 2014. And today we have 10 core funders who contribute $250,000 or more a year to a pooled fund. We also have currently 6 sidecar funders. We always try to create opportunities for funders who maybe can't come in at the core funder level or with as flexible of support to fund specific projects or smaller amounts year to year. So basically trying to provide lots of on-ramps for funders. So what are these funders here to do? If you can go to the next slide. Shared Insight's goal is that foundations and nonprofits are meaningfully connected to each other and the people and communities we seek to help, the folks we're talking about today on this call, and more responsive to their input and feedback. And if we can achieve this, then we envision a world, if you click the slide, where the communities and people we seek to help, especially those whose voices are least heard, are better off in ways they define for themselves. So like I said, we've been at this now for 7 years, and we've been able as a collaborative to grant out almost $30 million to over 500 nonprofits, primarily in the US and a few projects internationally. We have created a number of co-funding opportunities. So in addition to the 16 funders that I showed you on the first slide, we have a total of 134 funding partners from across the country. So to Eva's comment earlier that we hope that this is gaining traction not only with nonprofits but also with funders. We have some good early signals and engagement on that front that we could talk about. So I'm going to dive into our feedback work, but first I wanted to share just a couple other areas of work that we're focused on. Jacob mentioned ecosystems at the beginning of the call, and we really do think about a broad feedback ecosystem, and that ecosystem needs a lot of things as it grows, matures, and hopefully thrives. And so several things that we're supporting. One is we call feedback research, which is exploring the relationship between feedback and outcomes. Those projects take a while, so many are underway as we speak. We share all the results on our website and in blogs, webinars, whenever we can, so keep an eye out for those. We're really excited to be launching a participatory grant-making initiative with $1 million that's going to be focused on climate change and climate justice and elevating the voices of those often least heard and yet also most affected by climate change. So that should be coming up later in 21. We have some international work I've mentioned, and then we really try to support funders to build their listening practices and to change the systems inside their institutions to make listening more systematic, much as it was described in the poll. And then one of our most signature focus areas, and the one that we're here to talk about today, is supporting nonprofits to build their capacity and increase their impact through high quality, sustainable feedback loops with the people they serve. So when we got started in 2014, we made a handful of grants to organizations to do this, to build their capacity and create feedback loops. And each grant was like its own island. People had to figure it all out. What data are we going to collect? How are we going to collect it? And it was expensive, first of all. I mean, it could take $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 for a single organization. And there was a lot of repetition and a lot of decision fatigue. What platform should we collect it on? Should we ask this question or that question? And so we realized that if there were a tool that could eliminate some of those barriers, decision fatigue, and bring the cost down, that we thought many more nonprofits would be able to participate. And in fact, that has been the case. Jacob, several times it's come up, but Jacob in particular mentioned feedback loops a minute ago. I wanted to make sure we're all kind of talking about the same thing. I mean, other panelists may have other definitions, but with Shared Insight and in my remarks, we're thinking about high quality feedback loop as being one where you design your process, collect the data, interpret In collecting it, prioritize, as we've talked about, the people that you're seeking to serve and voices least heard. In interpreting the data, making sure to bring an equity lens and to hear voices that might be coming from the margins. It's not always that something you've only heard 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times means it isn't important. In fact, that can be a place to go. To me, the feedback pops up little flags. It doesn't tell you what to do. It tells you where to go look for more and ask more questions. Then there's responding to the data, and it's really important to embed clients in that process, to have clients or past clients, people who can speak to the experiences of clients. What do they see in the data? What responses do they think and hope the organization should take? And then closing the loop, going back out to the people who gave feedback and sharing, we heard you. We can't do anything about this thing for this reason. We can do something about this. Here's a change we're going to try, that sort of thing. That is really important for building trust. Think of all the times that people are asked for things and then they don't see any impact, or even, I mean, a broken feedback loop can be extractive. So it's really important to close that feedback loop. What we've experienced when this is done well is that this can create many ripple effects in terms of the types of changes that programs can make. So Eva, you can go ahead. So what's happening in the Listen for Good survey? Well, it's on the SurveyMonkey platform. So the back end data is all collected there. That doesn't mean everybody uses SurveyMonkey to collect the data. There's a lot of paper administration of surveys, verbal administration, text. There's all sorts of different ways to do this. But on the back end, the data gets aggregated in SurveyMonkey. Another great thing about that platform, besides it's pretty ubiquitous, most organizations are really comfortable with it. We can also support all 56 languages that SurveyMonkey offers for data collection, which is really important for DEI lenses and considerations as well. So the core survey contains these 7 questions. The first 3 are an adaptation of the Net Promoter System. You may have been Net Promoted in the past. How likely are you to recommend this service to a friend or family member who might need it? What is this organization good at? That's a scale of 0 to 10. What are they good at and what could they do better? Are open-ended questions. This can be really fertile ground for organizations to have both things to celebrate with their teams and also places, again, to dig deeper. And then back to a rating scale. Overall, how well has this organization met your needs? How often do staff treat you with respect? How easy is it for you to get services? There can be open-ended options there. And how connected do you feel to staff or peers, if that's a relevant, variable for the organization? And again, one of the many powerful things about a common data collection platform is that we can provide benchmarks and we can look across the data for themes and trends. Of course, organizations can also add demographic questions, which enables them to disaggregate the data. There have been powerful things that organizations have found, either about the ways in which people are having similar experiences and that's what they would hope, or maybe where people of different demographic backgrounds are not having the same experiences, and that's something for the organization to dig into and work on in their DEI journeys. In addition to nonprofits, this data and information can be really valuable for funders to learn alongside them. And so we're seeing more and more of that. That's why we structured it to have those 134 funding partners that we talked about earlier. So I'm going to wrap this up for now by sharing what the next participation opportunities are. We have 2 coming up for organizations that feel like Listen for Good might be the right tool for you. One is Listen for Good Online Plus. That's a more self-directed kind of you take the lead and chart your feedback journey, and we provide some limited but very responsive coaching and support. And that's just $1,000 that either a nonprofit can provide or they can get a grant to cover. And then Listen for Good Premium has more extended coaching and support through each step of the process, and also the option for a learning cohort. So the next opportunity to apply for those things is July 15th, and all of that information is available at fundforsharedinsight.org. So I'll stop there, Eva, but really looking forward to what questions folks have and where we might dig in later in the webinar.
Thanks, Lindsay. That makes sense. And I think one of the things to say about this Listen for Good opportunity is that it kind of builds on the years of work that have happened, right? Like real work with real organizations to put out these questions in the field and to work through some of the challenges of that. And so this is an opportunity, folks can get started just by using the questions, which we showed and which are available. And then obviously they can also get started with a little bit more support through the Listen for Good online community.
Yep, exactly right.
So I encourage folks to submit your questions, but we will keep moving as we have more to share. So I will invite Jacob into our virtual stage, and I'd like him to really speak to a little bit how it is that organizations can start sharing their practices.
Thank you, Eva. And let me step back actually and put this in the context of broader efforts to make sure that information flows in the social sector. And in particular, how information flows from an individual nonprofit organization to those that might need it, whether that's donors or collaborating organizations, journalists, or researchers. It was our goal at GuideStar and is our goal at Candid to create a space where nonprofits are able to tell their own story on their own terms and know that that information will flow out to those who need it. And that most obviously is manifested in the GuideStar profile on guidestar.org, where each nonprofit in the US has its own profile. And according to Google Analytics, those are viewed by about 12 million unique users each year. And that is a critical channel for this information, and there is evidence that it really matters. For example, we have seen research by scholars at Villanova University and the University of Wisconsin that has shown that those organizations that are sharing additional data on GuideStar do actually see sometimes a quite significant double-digit increase in their revenue from donations. So it does seem to matter. That said, we also recognize that what happens on our website is only a piece of the puzzle. So we've invested over the years significantly into having this information flow other places where people might need it, through partnerships with Google and Amazon and Facebook, donor-advised funds like Fidelity and Vanguard, as well as partnerships with many individual foundations. We recognize, though, that that puts a real responsibility on us to tell a full story about nonprofits and to create a mechanism where nonprofits can share information across multiple dimensions of their work. And that's why we created this Seal of Transparency program that allows organizations to share additional information and be recognized for that transparency. Now, this is not a rating, but it is an indication of transparency by nonprofits. And more than 200,000 nonprofits have claimed their profile, and approximately 80,000 have achieved one of our transparency seals. And in the process of building this up, we've come to have to wrestle with the different dimensions of what it means to be a nonprofit. There are the obvious ones like programs and finances, governance. But there are other elements that are really important. And we at Candid don't see ourselves as experts in every single aspect of nonprofit performance. That's why we go to partners to help us design the questions for individual sections. And when we added, in consultation with partners at Fund for Shared Insight, Feedback Labs, and others, we recognized that feedback was an important dimension of nonprofit performance. So we partnered with these other organizations to figure out how to frame a set of questions that could capture the basics of feedback practice as a first step towards nonprofits being able to share that and recognizing that that was an important dimension of what nonprofits do. And Eva, I'll hand it back to you to talk about how that plays out through our platform.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jacob. So let's talk a little bit about how it is that you as an organization can share your feedback practice on the GuideStar profile, because that is, as Jacob mentioned, a way to really share it pretty broadly within the sector. So first, of course, you need to be able to access your profile and get connected with your profile. As Jacob mentioned, there are over 1.6 million nonprofits that have a profile on GuideStar by virtue of their registration with the IRS. And many of them have chosen to connect with it directly and add information beyond the tax form. Just very quickly, how to do that if you don't already know. You do come to guidestar.org and you first create an account, because we need to know you're a real person and who you are. We are an online platform, so we're kind of protecting ourselves against, well, bots and machines. So first, we need to make sure that you're a real person and that you can actually represent the organization that you say that you represent. So when you come on GuideStar after you create an account, you come to a update nonprofit profile page, and there is a nice, very bright yellow button that says get started now, and that will lead you through the set of steps to claim your profile and to demonstrate your association with the organization that you want to add information for. So then the next step after that is to actually update your information. What does that mean? Well, let me walk through that. So when you have claimed your profile and you've been approved to modify it, you will have access to this kind of backstage experience where you can add information, publish it, and it will flow through and appear on your public profile. This experience kind of shows you the set of questions. As Jacob mentioned, there are the seals of transparency, which have a set of questions with them. And then there are recommended but optional sections, and How We Listen is one of those sections that ask about deeper information about your practice. Within the How We Listen section, I want to just give you a quick sense of what this involves. So first of all, we start off very simply by asking, does your organization collect feedback from the people that you serve? And just as I did in this event, we define what that means. It is really listening to the people that you serve that we are emphasizing. And the answers are yes, no, or NA, right? Not applicable for some reason to your organization circumstances. If you say no, we don't ask you any further questions. There's no penalty, nothing bad appears on your profile. It's just indicating that you're not yet doing that. If you do answer yes, then we do ask some further questions in order for you to share your practice. So specifically, once again, we kind of ask, who are the people that you serve by your mission? Describe briefly. This is a free form answer, and it's not a gotcha or a trick question. We simply want to better understand who you see as the people that are served by your mission. Next, there are a couple of multiple choice questions that are very practical. How is your organization collecting feedback from the people that you serve? Is it a survey, an electronic method? Is it a suggestion box? And then how is your organization using feedback from the people that you serve? And again, this is a select all that apply, multiple choice answer. And what we see in some of the data, we have had over 7,000 organizations already participate, is that many of them are looking for new ways to improve their programs. And then for some of them, they are really looking to remedy some, poor client experiences that they would like to understand better and address. So there are those choices. And then next, we ask you a really interesting question. Basically, we ask you to briefly describe a recent change that your organization has made in response to the feedback that you have received. And I think in looking at the responses here, this is your opportunity to tell sort of a short story. So by listening to, say who you received feedback from, we learned that, say what you discovered, so we, and then describe a change that you have made. This is kind of an easy little template that you could follow to offer your response. And we have seen, hundreds and thousands of really wonderful responses of changes that have been made. So for example, from this organization, Cancer Services of Allen County, after feedback from parents of children with cancer, we adjusted the amount and the way we're providing transportation assistance to the families that we serve, which, it's a simple change, but can be such a powerful change. Next, we ask, with whom does your organization share the feedback you got? And this goes back to the earlier point that Lindsay highlighted around closing the loop. We obviously hope that you do share it internally within your organization, with your board and your staff. These are folks that can really make some decisions or take action on the feedback. And at the same time, we really are encouraging you to make sure that you do get back to the people that offered the feedback in the first place, that they have some sense of what you heard and what you've done about what you heard. And it doesn't mean that you have to address everything. It just means that you are communicating with them and building that relationship with them actively. And then we've added a new question this year, and we are interested in your reflection on how asking for feedback has changed your relationship with the people that you serve, or shifted power to them over decisions or rules or program content or in other ways. And again, this is a free-form text response, and we're honestly looking to learn from you all in how this process, how seeking feedback changes your relationship with your constituents. So we are encouraging you to participate in that, and we will be sharing with the field and with you all kind of what we learned from this question. And then finally, there are a couple of, again, back to fairly simple practice questions. Which of the following feedback practices does your organization routinely carry out? And this is getting at what quality feedback practice looks like. I think one of the things that we really don't want is to create sort of a perfunctory feedback practice where, you only ask the people that you want to hear from and not the people that might have constructive feedback, or you only ask sporadically versus actually having a more systematic practice. So this set of answers in a way gives you a little bit of a sense of what some of those high quality feedback practices really are. And it's okay if you don't do all of them. It's an opportunity to really learn what those are and to put those into work for your organization. And then finally, we know that sometimes this is easier said than done. There are challenges in creating feedback. You as an organization have resource constraints, time constraints, many other priorities. And so we recognize that and want to understand better what are some of the challenges that you're facing in collecting feedback, so that folks at the Fund for Shared Insight, within the funder community, within the nonprofit community that supports practice, can be looking at how those could be addressed. So I will add that the section ends with a couple of questions that are really links to additional resources that you might want to follow. And these are ones that have been developed in partnership with Feedback Labs, who we'll hear from next. But there are some links to resources that end the section. And then finally, I do want to say that you do have to publish the information. So when you provide an update, there is a publish tab and a step that essentially makes it official and makes it flow on the profile, right? So you can draft the responses in the background, and then you have to actually, agree to these terms and publish their responses in order for them to appear publicly. I will say that, as I mentioned, there are over 7,000 organizations that have done it. This is a great example from Mosaic Forum of a person who wanted to start a program to help Muslim residents in her community connect with resources. She wanted to make sure that her program reached people. When she first offered a workshop, 5 people showed up. That wasn't really the response that she was hoping for. And so Jane took the time to essentially seek broader feedback from the community that she was trying to serve about what was and wasn't working for them, and was able to make some adjustments, both in terms of the timing of the workshop and the content and who was invited. And her attendance obviously went up, and many since since then, many workshops have been conducted by that organization, again, with very active feedback. So, you know, it's good. We asked Jane, why did she choose to share? No, she felt like it was good for her organization to showcase how it is that they connect with the clients and the people that they serve, and that they are really engaged with them. So we will next talk very briefly about how feedback is about to be even more visible beyond the GuideStar profile that you see it on. And I'll invite Jacob to join me for this part of the conversation about our partner, Charity Navigator.
Sure, thank you, Eva. Yeah, so briefly, an example of how this information that's collected on GuideStar flows through and has implications elsewhere in the social sector. And our partners at Charity Navigator are going to be using the How We Listen data. In fact, just started a couple weeks ago. And I'll briefly talk through that while flagging that I'm not representing Charity Navigator here, but they shared these slides with us and invited us to share them with you all today. Now, over the years, Charity Navigator has come under some criticism, including from me, about a focus on financial ratios in their rating system. And much to their credit, they were really trying to go beyond that and to build in other ways of judging the quality of nonprofits. And they built something called the Encompass rating system, which brings in, it's a series of experiments to bring in new kinds of data. Next slide, please. And one of those is the culture and community, what they call a beacon, and that brings in many of the players that are involved on today's webinar and important partners. And the key thing here is that one can get credit for this beacon for culture and community by filling out the How We Listen data on GuideStar. And that information flows through over to Charity Navigator and shows up on their site. So it's an example of organizations in the field playing different roles, Charity Navigator, a rating agency, Candid, a data platform, trying to build a system that is as easy for nonprofits to use as possible, has as little waste as possible, and helps to encourage nonprofits to listen to their constituents and to build up that feedback loop. And yeah, there's more information on Charity Navigator's website, but it's great to see this kind of alignment across some of the key platforms in the field.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob. And I think what we want to emphasize is that because Charity Navigator will be, giving credit for participation in the How We Listen section, if you do listen to the people that you serve, there's no penalty if you don't, but you will get credit if you do. And because they will be showing, what that means through the How We Listen section for their donors, this is another way that donors will have more visibility into your nonprofit's feedback practice. So I think that's an important component of that. So let's make sure we talk a little bit about how to start listening. If you haven't started already, or if you're looking for some guidance on how to get started here. And for this part, I will invite Rod to the stage.
Thank you so much, Ava. I'm really excited to talk a little bit more about feedback and how you can get started with designing your practice. So to give you a little background on Feedback Labs, we started 8 years ago as just an informal conversation of some international funders in the DC area. They would get together and they would have these conversations about how they could better center the voices of the communities in which they do work and the communities that they serve. And just a few short years later, that group of 5 or so funders has expanded. So that table grew from 5 to 6 people to about 600 organizations around the world. And we're so excited that conversation has been able to continue as Feedback Labs. So our big goal at Feedback Labs is thinking about how we can make feedback the norm. So making feedback the norm with nonprofits, in governments, and at the boardroom table at our funders. So I want to share with you a story about a feedback practice. I want to talk to you a little bit more about the importance of closing the loop, and then we'll leave you with some great resources. So in thinking about feedback, the word feedback and listening are often used interchangeably. So organizations will use them and they're not quite the same. So when you think about listening, listening is when you're having a conversation. So you're having a conversation and you're not simply listening so that you can extract information, but you're having a dialogue. So it's a two-way process. Feedback is a little bit different. With feedback, you're listening, but you are also listening for some of the other things that may not be apparent. So you're thinking about how this person thinks, how they're feeling, their perceptions, and most importantly, this is from the vantage point of people who are affected by the product or service that you offer. So listening becomes feedback when you make a decision to actually act upon what you've heard. One of the things that's so key to feedback is ensuring that you are taking what you hear, analyzing it, making decisions on how to move forward, and then something that has come up a couple of times, which is closing the loop. So ensuring that the community that you serve understands that you heard them, and this is what we're going to do going forward. And you can advance to the next slide. So I want to share a story with you about a community center called SHAPE. Chandra Muhammad, who you see here on the slide, is actually a former Feedback Fellow. And SHAPE is a community center that is nestled in the 3rd Ward of Houston, Texas. Houston is one of the most diverse cities in our country, but one of the things that we've learned through the sharing of their story is that diversity does not always bring about equity or inclusion. Through the work that they were doing at SHAPE, Chandra and her team began to learn that the African American community primarily were finding it difficult to find affordable housing in Houston. They were running into challenges with respect to the availability of housing and the prices that they were paying and some extra fees that they were being charged. And when they brought those stories to Chandra, she was then able to take those to the city and share some of the anecdotal evidence that was presented to her. And to her surprise, the city informed her that, well, in the past year, we've only heard maybe 100 complaints. You know, that doesn't necessarily rise to the occasion of there being a problem. So what Chandra began to understand was that there was a breakdown in the feedback loop. You can learn more about the story of SHAPE and Chandra's work there on our blog at feedbacklabs.org. But what they were able to do was really leverage the relationship that they had built in the community, the ties that they had in the community, the trust that the community had, but also then take their resources and serve as an advocate for the community. And they held a fair housing fair that created an opportunity for the community to interface directly with city leaders. So they found a broken feedback loop and they were able to insert themselves and to become that missing link there. And you can advance. So in thinking about feedback and thinking about the way in which we build our feedback practices, some things that you need to consider is bandwidth. Does your staff have the bandwidth to do the work that you're setting out to do? So do you have the bandwidth? Do you have the resources in place? But then also think about the bandwidth of your constituents. So are they in a mental state? Are they in a position where they have the resources to interface with your feedback collection method? So those are things that you need to think about. There will never be a perfect time to seek feedback. I think COVID-19 has shown us that the world can change overnight. So don't put off implementing a feedback practice for the perfect opportunity, the perfect staffing model, the perfect budget. You will never have the perfect opportunity. Think about how you communicate with your community currently. So think about what's working. Is it email? Is it phone banking? Is it text messages? Think about what's currently working, but don't stop there. You need to talk to your community and think about how they would prefer to be communicated with. Be mindful of the effort that it's going to take for your team to actually do this work and to do it effectively and properly. And then most importantly, you need to be prepared to respond to the feedback that you receive. So closing the loop is so key. In instances where you go through all of the motions of creating these feedback practices and you don't close the loop, some of the challenges that you may experience is that you risk breaking trust with your community. So your community no longer trusts you. They think that you've wasted their time, or worse, they feel as though you don't care, and you may have trouble in future trying to engage your community. So you can go to the next slide.
And Rod, I actually want to jump in here because I think that's such an important point that you talk about, responding. And at the same time, I think it can be a point that can raise anxiety for nonprofits. Like if they're not able to say, we can fix this issue, or we can, we can address like the housing crisis, like some of the challenges that people raise will be beyond the scope and the ability of a particular nonprofit to address. So I guess I'm curious as to your advice for someone to be able to kind of share without, share if you're not able to address some of the things that you hear.
Yeah, and you raise an important thing, especially in thinking about the fact that some of us are governments and small governments. Transparency is key. So I think being upfront at the beginning of your feedback practice, what's on the table? So internally thinking about what can we do, what limitations exist, whether those limitations are the law or whether those limitations are your budget or your bandwidth, you need to be upfront with what's on the table and lead with what's possible. So if you're thinking about what you can do, the framing of your question should take that in mind.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah. You were about to say a little bit more about resources, as well as I think you actually were just touching on the expectation.
Yeah, absolutely. So communication is so important. So I think in communicating the process, you're able to ensure that all of the stakeholders are on board. So whether those stakeholders are your board, your staff, or your funders, everyone understands what the goal is and what the process will be. You want to draw in as your additional stakeholders the community that you serve, and be sure that they understand what you're doing, what the goal is, and how they will understand what the outcomes are and what the next steps are going to be. You want to ask some actionable questions. So like we were just talking about, there's no sense in designing a survey that centers around things that you do not have the power or the resources to affect change. So focus on the things that you can actually do, so that expectations are set on the front end and there won't be disappointment on the back end. And then most importantly, just ensuring that you're focusing on closing the loop. So as you're designing your process, as you're thinking about how you'll ask your questions, how you'll collect data, how you'll analyze data, having a plan on the front end about how you'll do it. One thing that we talk about a lot of times within Feedback Labs is that the way that you deliver feedback should be similar to the way that you collected it. So if you had a big event like SHAPE, where you pulled people together and you had a forum to have people talk through the issues that they're having, maybe you should do something similar when it's time to deliver the feedback and talk about the next steps. The other thing that's very important in thinking about all of these steps here is keeping equity front of mind. So just ensuring that the way that you collect feedback, the way you frame your questions, and the way that you think about closing the loop, thinks about people at every aspect of your community that you serve. You can go to the next slide. So in thinking about your feedback practice and thinking about your next steps, in the poll that you took earlier, we saw that a lot of us are in the stage where we have a feedback practice, but maybe we're not following all the steps. Maybe it's not as systematic as we'd want it to be. Some of you indicated that you've not gotten started as well, or you've not got started yet. And then a couple of you indicated that we're doing it. We're doing it. We've got a great process. We're closing the loop every single time. The good news is no matter where you are in your process, whether you're just getting started, whether you just heard feedback for the first time today and you're excited about getting started, or you've got some great ideas and maybe you can share them with our community, we've set up some resources for you. So in the coming weeks, April 6th, we'll have a Feedback 101 webinar. So it'll be a similar format to this one, but you'll have a lot of opportunities to ask questions and to talk about your current needs. If you are in the stage where you have a process, but maybe you're in need of more resources or more help, or maybe even some one-on-one time, you can take our feedback quiz and you can kind of find out maybe why your process is not as systematic as you'd like it to be. And then maybe you're doing great work at your organization. We'd love for you to come to a LabStorm and talk to us about the work that you're doing and how you're doing it, so that members of our community can glean from the work that you're doing. And then this will all be shared with you, of course. But then if you're somebody who maybe just doesn't know where to go next, there are a lot of resources that you can find at our website, feedbacklabs.org, where you can find tools, where you can find resources, where you can find articles that may be helpful to you. But you can also find ways to get in touch with some of the leaders and experts at Feedback Labs that can help with you with additional personalized resources.
Thank you so much, Rod. So I'll invite all our speakers to come into the stage, the space, and we will take some Q&A, and I hope that the Q&A has been active on the back end as well. Let me see if I can see, what are some of the questions that have come in. There's a question from Jamie. When we're collecting data, is that program impact data or feedback data? Should we involve beneficiaries from the start of program design or in the impact data analysis? So I think if I'm understanding the question directly, there is a question around sort of impact data versus feedback data, and should beneficiaries be involved in program design, or later on when you're thinking about the impact of the program. Rod, would you be able to say a little bit to that question?
Yeah, definitely. And I will say, just as a disclaimer, this is always going to depend on the type of organization you are, the type of work you're doing, and the type of community that you serve. In thinking about the way we think about designing a feedback process, it's not going to be based on an event. This is something that's going to be continual. So I would say that it is important to get feedback and buy-in from your community and your constituents on how you are designing the process. And then I think as data is coming in, this is going to be a continuous two-way conversation. So to this question, without being able to get into the specifics of your organization, I think it's important that you get feedback at every single stage of the process.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rod. There are a couple of questions for Lindsay here around Fund for Shared Insights. So there's a question from Larissa, where can organizations find more information about your international work at the Fund for Shared Insight?
It's also at fundforsharedinsight.org, and it's pretty early days. We had made just a handful of grants until very recently. We have a more robust international committee that's just formed and started working, and we're actually going to be doing some, and Britt Lake, who works with Rod, is on that committee, and we're going to be doing some landscaping in probably 4 or 5 countries with local consultants in those places, and starting to expand out, in addition to the support that we have for Feedback Labs and a few other efforts. But those are on the website now, and there should be some updates in the coming months as we expand and add some new work.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I think there's a question from the audience about resources. Can panelists share some key resources for feedback beyond what might be collected as part of program evaluations? So this is an interesting question, because I think, Lindsay, you had initially highlighted a way of asking for feedback that isn't specific to a program, right? That is more about the work of the organization. So maybe you could say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so in our feedback research work that I mentioned, we're trying to look at where and how feedback from participants about their experiences might relate to the outcome data. So that's sort of one direction to go in thinking about that. But most organizations who use Listen for Good, it's kind of decoupled from their impact evaluation. It's really about how are you experiencing the programs and services, and each organization has to think about what the right moment or moments are to collect that. I agree with Rod that there are sort of probably not wrong times. And yeah, I mean, there could be, but that throughout each phase, you're going to learn something different. You're going to have a slightly different purpose in what it is that you're listening for and what you might then do with the data. So in our case, it will often be that folks will want to know after a service experience, after you came to the food bank, how was that experience? Or maybe if it's a longer program, let's say it's a school year program, maybe you decide that there's a key point, maybe a third of the way through, when students know enough to give feedback, but you still have 2/3 of the program where you could even be responsive in relative real time. So I think that thinking about what are the moments, and the other thing we found, by the way, we have pretty rigorous evaluations and we post them all online of this work, and a very high percentage of organizations report being able to make changes in response to feedback. And that, I think, I don't have a data report to show this, I think that's much less common for impact evaluation. I think if you asked organizations, what percent of you or how much have you felt you could make actionable change from this impact evaluation, it's often just a much slower timeline and the questions aren't nuanced or precise enough to help with that. So we're finding that organizations do feel like they're able to make pretty actionable changes. And often the other thing, just to put a point on it, is that how you collect the feedback really matters. Like you said, Eva, we don't want this to be sort of a perfunctory or even damaging exercise. A lot of organizations have landed on hiring former clients to do the feedback collection. So having somebody come in who was in the program before and having maybe the staff member leave, and really making it, there isn't one right way to do that, but making it safe. And so also thinking about when in a program you might be able to do something like that in order to listen with hopefully higher trust and candor.
Wonderful. Well, I think this is all the time that we have for questions. So thank you again to all of you who have joined us, both to our speakers who have shared their expertise and some of the resources that are available to you all, and also the audience members who have joined us today. What I'll just say and end with is, you've got a lot of content, but the first point is, listen first if you don't already, right? And there are resources that we have pointed you to, whether it's the Fund for Shared Insight or the Feedback Labs, both have great resources for getting started on feedback practice. Share what you do via How We Listen on GuideStar. And then we think it is important for funders to hear that direct voice of the people that you serve. So take the opportunity in your grant application or in your conversations in applying for grants to actually highlight that you do this and what you're hearing. I think that's so important. So thank you all again for joining us today. And please stay connected with us at Candid. If we offer a lot of really great programming on topics relevant to nonprofit work. So stay in touch with us for our next event. Thank you all.